afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, Heart failure is a global burden, and CAD accounts for nearly half of the entire population of heart failure. And things are no different in India. In fact, the figures could be even higher. Trivandrum Registry and the International Registry put the Indian heart failure CAD contribution between 48 and 71%. And though we are sensitized to HFrEF, we seem not to realize that heart failure with preserved ejection fraction form almost 50% of all heart failure. So it's just topical and relevant to discuss, revascularization in heart failure. And I propose to do it under these 10 heads, very quick, short bullet points I'm going to give, maybe a minute on each. First, we must realize that heart failure is more important than the ejection fraction, so that reduced ejection fraction but no heart failure does better than preserved ejection fraction but heart failure. So, and that's true for both short-term results and long-term results. Secondly, what is the rationale for revascularization in LV dysfunction? If you look at the results before the modern pharmacotherapy came, 2 years survival rate was barely 30%. And ACE inhibitors reduced the mortality, but still the mortality was 12, residual mortality was 12%. And with mineralocorticoids, it was still 17%. And almost half of this mortality was because of ACS. And we know that in select patients, myocardial revascularization improves alveolar function, improves survival, but then it's challenging. These patients are old with a lot of comorbidities, and the operative mortality is quite high. So one needs to balance kind of a thing, the high procedural risk on one side and the survival benefit on the other side. Unfortunately, there is a gross lack of data. If you look at any one of these important studies, they barely had 2 to 5% of patients with LV dysfunction or heart failure. And the first study that really looked at this question in a formal way was the STRITCH trial, in which the mortality, the primary outcome of the study was no different between CABG and the medical therapy, though certain other outcomes like CV mortality, hospitalization were less in CABG. Even the extended 10-year study was done, and that showed that there is improved results of CABG, even mortality is improved, and the results are better for multivessel disease and for young patients. A meta-analysis of 21 studies showed that the invasive treatment decreased the mortality as against the medical treatment. Now, what about SVR or the ventricular restoration? Now, the observational data is all in favor of SVR, but we look at the STITCH 2 hypothesis, the randomized control trial, there was no difference at 5 years between patients who had just CABG and those patients who had CABG with SVR. So the data was equivocal. That raised a question that is there a threshold of LV dilatation beyond which SVR doesn't work? And figures of anything between 60 to 90 ml per meter square of left ventricular end systolic volume was suggested as the cutoff point. Well, the point to take home here is that there is a point of LV dilatation beyond which all these procedures are useless, and we must not wait for the patients to deteriorate to that point, and they should be taken on early in the course of the disease. What about revascularization in HFpEF? Now, it has been shown that the reduced ejection fraction is a strong predictor of 30-day mortality, but it is the heart failure which is the strong predictor of mortality in long term. And in a direct comparison between HFpEF and HFrEF, though HFrEF had a higher operative and 30-day mortality, the long-term 5-year mortality was higher in HFpEF. So it is very important that these patients are also taken seriously. And when you compare HFpEF with no HFpEF, cardiac mortality, sudden death are statistically significantly higher in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Now, what mode of revascularization to use? PCI or CABG? Unfortunately, Dr. Manjunath is not there to address this. There is sufficient evidence in literature. Iribarne's study, look at the blue. The CABG had better short-term results at 6 months and long-term results with over PCI. Similarly, we find in the SAR meta-analysis, the forest plot, mortality, myocardial infarction, etc., all favoring CABG, stroke, quite equivocal in some studies, even favoring PCI. Sun et al., once again, a very recent publication this very year, shown all-cause mortality, cardiac mortality, favoring CABG as compared to PCI. And so much so, Nagendran goes to call it a public health impact is substantial, with PCI having 60% more, CABG having more than 60% relative risk reduction and 16% absolute risk reduction in long-term 5-year survival. Even in the acute heart failure registry, the Korean heart failure, CABG was found to be marginally superior to PCI. What about pump versus off-pump? Jose et al. Has shown that off-pump reduces early mortality and improves the outcome, but 5-year outcomes are exactly the same. And that was also our own data that pump, when we were doing surgery in patients with ejection fraction less than 30% with heart failure, the mortality was 5%. With off-pump, it's 3%. Arterial grafts, they are safe in LV dysfunction and they improve 36 months survival and angina, and therefore arterial revascularization should be used. Complete versus incomplete, all these important studies have shown that in the overall cohort of patients, complete revascularization reduces mortality as far as long-term is concerned. But when you look at LV dysfunction, as I told you, most of these studies had such small number of patients that data is not available, and only one study which addresses this question is the CAS registry, which is an old one, where LV dysfunction patients were in sufficient number, where complete revascularization was shown to be better. And this has been verified recently in this study by Paika et al. But I want to stress that physiological complete revascularization, which is based on FFR and which is validated in PCI through the FAME study, is not as yet validated in CABG. We have, in fact, 3 more studies which have not validated FFR in CABG as yet. What about, is viability mandatory? Well, observational data, it is useful. Look at Allman data, which is the landmark paper, when you had viability, revascularization was far superior to medical treatment. And when there is no viability, both have high morbidity and equivalent with no benefit of revascularization, and number of other observational data, series are available. But when we look at the randomized trial, look at the sub-study of the CIS trial, no benefit at 5 years, and even at 10 years, the mortality was same. The only RCT which is looking at viability, the POWER study, no benefit from PET imaging, and the heart study, mortality was exactly the same. So what does it raise? It raises 2 questions. Are imaging modalities reliable? Well, to characterize a hibernating myocardium, we must look at cell membrane integrity, which is seen by the nuclear scans, preserved metabolism through the PET FDG uptake, contractile reserves through dobutamine stress echo, and absence of scar through late gadolinium enhancement or MRI study. But as we see, nuclear studies have relative better sensitivity, wall motion, DSC, more specificity, but none of them is absolute holy grail, and all of them are complementary. and have certain lacunae. And if you look at this study by Liu et al., when they did PET study, there was no viability, but they went on to do CABG, and at 1 year, 67% of those segments which were non-viable showed viability after revascularization. Means the modality we use, PET scan, didn't do its job. Similarly, if you look at this study by Stipak et al., patients with no viability on DSC had improved LV function after CABG. LV wall thinning and limited scar. And after CABG, there was increased thickness of the muscle and increased contraction. So these are not really reliable. They are not fully reliable. I won't say they're not totally reliable, not fully reliable. And then are we profiling our patients well enough? The answer is absolutely no once again. It has been shown functional testing doesn't predict vulnerability of the plaque, which is the most important thing. There is no biomarker available to predicate the survival. And ECG also, myocardial dyssynchrony has shown some element of importance that increases the mortality if it is present, but nothing is foolproof. Does CABG prevent arrhythmias? One would have thought yes, because ischemia occurs from paracicatrix. Arrhythmias occur from paracicatrix ischemia. So if you do a CABG, you're going to remove this ischemia, which is an arrhythmia trigger. But unfortunately, much against what we would expect, there was no benefit at 32 months. And even if you look at the STITCH trial, the 5-year sudden cardiac death rate is 8%, with the maximum incidence of sudden cardiac death 2 months after CABG. That means CABG doesn't give any benefit there. And what about guidelines? Now, as far as revascularization is concerned, we are quite clear that these patients should be revascularized. ESC gives a 1B, and ACC-AHA gives a 2AB recommendation, with left main a 1B recommendation. But for viability studies, the guidelines are not helping. European guidelines say may be considered a 2B recommendation, and the American guidelines say reasonable. So it's kind of not helping. And what helps is this study by Ling et al., which they showed that mortality increases with increasing hibernating myocardium, and there is an equipoise at 10%. If you look at when there is 5% hibernating myocardium, medical therapy does better than revascularization. At 10% hibernating myocardium, both are equal. It is at 15% viability that you find revascularization is better, and the gap widens at 20%. So the cutoff point I would take is around 10 to 15%. And lastly, in this scenario where there is not much clarity, there are certain alternative factors which have come out of wisdom, which are not really documented. Things like I always take the size of the coronaries. If there is no viable myocardium dystally, the coronary arteries tend to come down in the size, and they become atretic small vessels. Look at ventricular wall thickness. Look at PA pressure and the RV function. Is there pulmonary venous hypertension evidence on chest X-ray? And things like making a patient walk, a 6-minute walk, or just climbing 2 flights of stairs, they can give you a lot of adjunctive information which one can use with the guideline information that we have. And there are ongoing studies which will help clarify certain aspects. But till we have all this data, I think this algorithm is very important. If a patient with an ischemic cardiomyopathy has angina, there is no debate. They must have angiography and they must be revascularized. That's evidence enough for viability. However, if there is no angina, then the angiography should be done. If the disease is suitable for revascularization, means the coronary arteries are of decent size with good distal runoff, we must do a viability testing. And if the viability testing shows a burden of viable myocardium of more than 10%, one should go in for intervention. So, ladies and gentlemen, revascularization has definite role. Heart failure is more important than the LV function, and that really needs to be looked into. Viability testing has probability a role, some role, but even if viability is not demonstrated, if the myocardium has sufficient thickness and if the coronary arteries are of decent size, then we must revascularize these patients, because none of these imaging modalities are foolproof, and these alternative factors are important in decision making, which has to be personalized for each patient, and the decision should be taken by the heart team. Thanks a lot.